Hey everybody, this is Jesse Krieger with Lifestyle Entrepreneurs Press, joined today by Dr. Laura Sicola, forthcoming author of Speaking to Influence. And I'm excited to bring her on to talk a little bit about her book. And it comes out April 16th, available wherever books are sold. Laura, how are you doing today?
Jesse, I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for helping me with this project and being here to talk with me about it today.
Absolutely. And just by way of introduction, Dr. Laura has a TEDx talk on basically the value of saying your name right that's been viewed by over 5 million people now. And her book, Speaking to Influence, is all about leadership communication that gets results. And we're going to dive into some of those techniques and tactics here. But first, I want to start a little bit with the story behind Speaking to Influence. What was it that drove you to write this book?
Very simply, it's just the realization that so many people are frustrated by the fact that they have all this technical expertise, they have all these aspirations for what they want to achieve in their companies and their careers, but they're not getting the results they want. They're not being taken as seriously as they want, or they just feel like people don't get it when they speak. And while I can work miracles with somebody one-on-one or in small groups, there's an awful lot more people out there. And so I thought, why not put it into a nice, easy to digest, accessible package like a book where everybody can follow the instructions. There's exercises, worksheets, all sorts of stuff. And within a matter of hours, really come to great clarity on where people are getting in their own way and what to do to get out of it to get better results.
Wonderful. And so really, if I understand right, and for the benefit of everybody watching, it really comes down to speaking and, as you call it, vocal presence that really determines how the listener receives and experiences that person, and in turn, views them as influential or somebody that they want to listen to or somebody that indeed they see as a leader.
Yes. Absolutely. So any message has two parts to it, right? There's the content and then there's the delivery. We've all been in arguments where somebody gets upset and the other person says, "Why are you mad? What did I say?" And the other person says, "Well, it's not what you said, it's how you said it." Right? So it's actually both. You have to have good content, right? Your message has to be well articulated in the sense of well organized, the right words, the right detail, accurate information. But then that good stuff has to be delivered in a way that really reinforces it and projects you as someone who's credible. Because when you project that impression of credibility, that image of credibility, then people listen to your message differently. They weigh it differently. Now, having one that's good and the other that's not is going to get lost somewhere, right? If you have great content, but you kind of mumble your way through it, or you're fidgeting as you're doing it, or it's not delivered well. It's like dipping a pearl into mud. There's good stuff in there, you just can't find it. And if it's the other side where the content is all jumbled up and kind of off somehow, but your delivery is super charismatic and really interesting, and it's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig. It's entertaining, but it's not particularly valuable. So you really do have to craft the message well and deliver it, execute it really skillfully, and that's where the sweet spot is.
Well said. And I love the analogies of dipping a pearl in mud and putting lipstick on a pig. And I think, even as you were talking, it brings up memories of a professor in college, right, who's just sort of droning on. And with that monotonous delivery, it really is difficult to even pay attention. And sure, they may have credibility because they're standing in front of the room and they're teaching and they're a professor, but something about the vocal delivery itself can just put you to sleep if you don't get some of these things right. So maybe let's dive in and talk a little bit about what makes speech influential. And I know this is one of the sections in Speaking to Influence. And I love what you say about commanding the room, connecting with the audience, and closing the deal. What else would you say in terms of the elements and aspects of speech that make it influential?
What you've just described is my 3 C's of vocal executive presence: the ability to command the room, connect with the audience and close the deal. So one is about you and how you come off. The other is about how the audience relates to you. And the third is about where that takes you and the ability to make progress to get to yes. Closing the deal doesn't have to mean signing on the dotted line or exchanging money. It's about coming to agreement and saying, yes, let's move forward, whatever that forward motion is, which is where you want to get at the end of any interaction. So a big part of that, matching the content with the delivery, is the fact that credibility stems from the ability to align three different channels of communication all at the same time. There's the verbal, the vocal, and the visual. And your verbal channel is the what you say. That's the content, the script, the transcript, if you will, all those details, whether you use fillers like and you know and like, whether or not your details are interesting, too much, too little, etc. Then the second channel is the vocal channel. That's the sound of the words as they come out. So the difference when you think about it between sincerity and sarcasm, the content is exactly the same, but the sound lets you know whether you should be insulted or appreciative, right? So the difference between nice shirt and nice shirt, very different, even though the content technically hasn't changed. That vocal delivery makes a big difference. And the third channel is the visual channel, which is your words, your voice, your body language, your facial expressions, your posture, how you're groomed or dressed. And in the book, we dissect each of these different channels into all the different little elements that create the constellation of your vocal executive presence and what make your message land the way it lands.
And, you know, as you gave that example about sarcasm versus sincerity, I think, and tell me if you feel this is the case, that a lot of times in written communication, especially in emails and texts, for just firing off a message or writing something down, you miss that whole element of delivery. And I think that can be the root of a lot of misunderstanding, misinterpretation, potentially even consternation. And somebody comes away thinking, wow, that person's such a jerk, when in their mind, they were probably delivering it in a different way.
Oh, yes. I remember having an experience once where I had I had asked the neighbor by email for assistance with something. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's so busy. And I know I hate to impose on her this way, but let me ask if she doesn't mind if we can do X, Y, and Z. And she approached me later on and she, to my surprise, she said, I think we have to have a talk about boundaries. And I went, boundaries? What is that about? And she's like, and she basically expressed that she thought it sounded like I was making demands. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I said to her, I am so sorry that it came across that way. I was actually so afraid to hit send on it because I really didn't want to impose. And she said, oh, you know what? That made so much sense. I thought to myself, that just didn't sound like you. And it was so odd. And I thought, that's the problem with email. You just can't hear how something's intended. And who knows, and this is part of what we talk about when we look at the filters of what make people hear what they hear and infer what they infer, regardless of what you intend. And regardless of how you frame something, when you don't have all those pieces together, there's always going to be a gap, potentially, between what I think I say and what you think you hear. And the better you understand how those channels work together and how you need to be very careful in not omitting something through them, the better chance you have of ensuring that there isn't that really crucial gap.
Well said. And, I think for everybody watching this, you're probably getting some ideas about how you may have communicated in the past and maybe unintentionally created some kind of a misunderstanding, or where you've communicated in a way that was perhaps even more effective than you thought it was, perhaps because of vocal tonality and delivery and charismatic presence. So let's see if you could share a tip that anybody watching this can put into practice and start to use in their own life and business to speak more influentially, starting today.
Very easy. I have a rule. It's called my 60 to 60 rule. And what that means is that when you're leading a meeting, for example, or giving a presentation, even if you're just warming up the audience, and by audience, I mean whoever you're talking to, could be 3 other people at a conference table. But in that first minute, in the first 60 seconds, you are going to set the audience's expectations for the value that you're going to bring to the next 60 minutes of conversation. So where most people go wrong is that they feel like, well, I know all the content. I get nervous in the beginning and I sort of flub my way around, but then eventually I get into my groove and I'm fine after the first couple of minutes. The problem is you let them set their expectations based on that flubby, not so sure, struggling, seeking words, etc. So that by the time you get into your groove, people are already not so impressed with you. And that's going to color the way that they receive the rest of your message. So if you don't have time to rehearse an entire presentation, you do have time to rehearse the first 60 seconds. Even if it's something as simple as setting the agenda, welcoming people to the room, rehearse it, video record yourself, or at least audio record, and really recognize how one of the biggest gaps in the world is the 3 inches from here to here. Right? You can know something conceptually, but the ability to articulate it in a way that's exactly how you want it to come across is not nearly as simple and as intuitive as you might think. So rehearse that first 60 seconds to make sure that you hit the ground running, smooth sailing right from the beginning, and you've got them really viewing you as the expert that you want to be.
I love that. And I totally relate to it because it's really hard. And, there's common saying of you never get a second chance to make a first impression. But even if you're
Correct.
watching somebody for 30 minutes, an hour, and that first 60 seconds is your first impression, really. And if that doesn't come off well, that's when people start to take out their phone and they tune out. And now it's probably a much more difficult task to regain their attention or reposition yourself. So everybody that's watching this, take that practical and simple tip to heart. Just focus on the very beginning and perhaps the end of what you want to say and how you're delivering it. And let's talk about perhaps that little gap. I think you're pointing from your ear to your mouth, right?
Yes.
And
Or from
looking
your brain to your mouth, at least.
right.
Right.
And I know that there's a chapter in the book called Listening to Influence. So let's maybe switch gears for a second and talk about what are the elements of listening to influence that anybody who wants to speak and be more influential should be aware of?
First and foremost, when in doubt, the critical part of listening is that you stop talking. And as much as that may seem obvious, it's amazing how many people don't. They are sort of listening because somebody else is talking, but what they're really doing is listening for the gap. They're listening for someone else to take a pause, or they're looking for someone else to get to a place where they can jump in and then start to talk again. They're not really listening to understand. And the rules in listening to understand are a very different ballgame. It does take patience, but more importantly, it takes a sincere interest in understanding the other person's perspective. Because if they're not seeing what you're seeing and they keep reasserting something else, they wouldn't continue to reinforce the same point over and over if they didn't feel like you were missing something. So your job needs to really be listening to find that missing link. What is it that makes them feel like they can't let go of this? You have to be able to show them that you understand what their concerns are. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't mean you have to give in to their requests, but you have to show them that you get it, that you get what their priorities are, that you appreciate their pressures and their other challenges involved. Not that you're just ignoring it for the sake of getting your own message across and forcing them to swallow it. That's what's most important in listening to understand.
And it also, and that's super helpful. Great distinction that you set there. It also strikes me that there's a difference between listening to understand or listening in general and waiting for your turn to speak.
Yes.
I can think of so many times where, I've been talking, I'm going, you can see the other person is almost bubbling over, just waiting to go back in. And you can't really be retaining the information, let alone really pondering it, if you're just thinking about what am I going to say next. So
Correct.
do you see that as a big part of, I guess that's learning when not to talk or when to stop speaking in order to shift into a listening and an intake mode?
And you can tell by somebody's body language which version of listening that they're doing, right? Because if you are talking and you're watching somebody and they're going, clearly they're not really listening to absorb. They're going, they're just waiting for you to let them cut in. It's a very different intention in listening. So we want to make sure that we're not projecting that to others. And that's a place where using a video recorder, if you can, in some sort of, even if you just video record yourself while you're on the telephone with somebody. So you're only videoing yourself, not them. They don't know that you're video recording, but just later on, you watch 2 minutes worth of it and you see how often, what was your body language projecting? Did it seem like you were truly listening to understand or just waiting to jump in?
So, Laura, you've really shared some useful information so far and some practical tips that people can use and put into practice right away to speak more influentially. And as we start to wrap up this interview and this discussion, I'd love to turn our attention to your forthcoming book launch. Speaking to Influence is coming out April 16th, wherever books are sold. And we're really excited at LE Press to be your publishing partner. Maybe we can wrap up with a little bit of a discussion on your TEDx talk, which, as I mentioned in the beginning, has reached over 5 million people. And, I was looking through Brene Brown's Daring Greatly book the other day, and she wrote in that book, which became a huge bestseller, that her TED talk had over 5 million views. So you're on par with, you're in some pretty good company in terms of the reach that you've gotten with that talk. Maybe you can share a little bit about your experience of what led to that talk and what it's been like to deliver it and have your message seen by so many people.
Well, the beauty of it was simply that I was invited to give a talk because the theme of the conference was creating the sound. And they asked if I would do a talk on creating the sound in the world of speech and communication and voice. And I thought, sure, why not? This will be fun. That was the extent of my expectation of it. But I thought, I can use this as a platform to share the ideas with people on how they have a choice in creating their own leadership image. And so much of that has to do with the way that they articulate their message, the way that they communicate. And that was as simple as the topic was. And the fact that it has gone to over 5.5 million views now is just a real testament to the fact that this is something people are dying to know. This is something that is constantly being searched, and that there's just more interest in it than I think anybody ever could have imagined.
Wonderful. And as a final thought here, what was it like as you finished that final 60 seconds of your TEDx talk and heard the applause and realized that you got through it?
Well, I knew I'd get through it. So being on stage is something that's pretty natural to me. So I just had fun with it, and it was nice to be done. And it was really nice to hear afterwards that the feedback that I got from people either who were at the conference itself or who otherwise were just people who wrote to me afterwards and have written to me since, just to know that this made such a difference to them and how much it hit.
Wonderful. So thanks so much, Laura, for joining and taking the time today to share a little bit more about speaking to influence. And for everybody that's watching, I hope this has been helpful and that you got something actionable that you can use to speak and be more influential. And keep an eye out for Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice, coming out April 16th, available wherever books are sold. That's all for now. We'll see you in a future video, and take care.